late in the afternoon, and for others, it might be just the midday. So anyways, I hope you enjoy a coffee or a tea as part of this coffee lecture. So my name is Paloma Marín-Arraiza, and I work at ORCID as engagement manager for global consortia. The Austrian Consortium is one of the consortia I work with. And here you have also my contact details if you need anything from me, either via email or a social network. And today we're covering integrating ORCID in repositories and CRIS systems. So let me first of all begin with a overview of what I'm planned to talk today. And of course, you can use the Q&A section during the whole presentation and also at the end, the way you prefer. So first of all, we're going to provide a brief overview of ORCID, then in general, some ideas about integrating with ORCID, and we will then be a bit more precise with integrating with ORCID in repositories and then in CRIS systems. And for each of those cases, I'm going to provide some examples as well of institutions that have already done it. And we will have, I hope, plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So I assume that most of you are familiar with ORCID, but, and apologies if I'm repeating information that you already know, but for those of you who aren't that familiar with ORCID, ORCID is an independent, not-for-profit organization, which is open to participation by all. Both researchers and also organizations. And the registry was launched in 2012, so 12 years ago. And currently, we work only sustained by the fees of our member organizations. Everything that we do is guided by our values and funding principles. And ORCID is also community governed by a board of directors that are elected and representatives of our membership and community. This year, we have a strong presence from Ukraine, also South Africa and Latin America, Colombia and Chile joining our board. So we are very happy about that as well. Again, you probably are familiar with ORCID's mission, but the main idea is to enable transparent and trustworthy connections between researchers and their contributions, affiliations, and other activities by providing a unique persistent identifier for individuals. That's the ORCID ID. And individuals can use the ORCID ID as they engage in research, scholarship, and innovation activities. Remember that the ORCID ID is only for researchers, so institutions can't have an ORCID ID, but institutions can use the API integrating with ORCID, as I'm going to discuss in a couple of slides. ORCID, in general lines, provides three main services. The ORCID ID, as mentioned, the unique persistent identifier for researchers, then the ORCID record or ORCID profile, if you prefer. That is the page where we have the information about the researcher connected to the ORCID ID. And this includes employment, education, funding, peer review, research outputs, and other metadata. So don't understand, please, the ORCID record as only a list of publications. It is more than that. And then we have the APIs, as well as the services that support all our communities of practice to enable interoperability between the ORCID record and the system of a member organization. And here is where we are discussing the integration part. Currently, the adoption is worldwide. So we have users in almost every single country on the planet. And currently, we have more than 8 million active records, which means IDs that have been used in the past year. And also member organizations in 57 countries, including 27 national consortia and a regional consortium in Latin America. And in total, we have more than 5,000 systems that are integrated correctly using the member API. Researchers are always in the center of what ORCID does, which basically means that researchers are going to always share their ID in a secure way, so that then the different institutional systems or publisher systems, profiles or funder systems can connect, and via or using other persistent identifiers for institutions, for outputs, for funding, the information is going to be connected. And this is where the magic happens and when things go automatically after those permissions and securely sharing of the ID. A very common question as well is that, okay, researchers are in the center and everything is researcher controlled, but what happens with data quality if we rely only on researchers? So we basically aim to balance these two things, and we've established a list of different controls and ways to basically achieve these. On the one hand, researchers control their own record, and they set their visibility settings and priorities and all preferences. And organizations, after researchers' authentication, can only update the information that was added by that organization. They can't modify information added by others. And when it comes to data quality, apart from a list of terms to prevent misrepresentation and procedures in order to avoid or even delete false data and spam, then we also need to consider data quality as something that accumulates over time. So the more data is added to the ORCID registry in a trustworthy manner or validated manner, the better the quality of that data is going to be. So whenever you are adding data to the ORCID registry, please add it in the quality that you would like that data to be read or flow back into your system. So now let's go actually to the topic of this coffee lecture, which is integrating with ORCID. As mentioned, integrations are key to deriving value from ORCID. But let's clarify a bit what an integration is and what we're talking about when we refer to integrations. So an integration is a way to connect the ORCID registry with an institutional system using the ORCID API. When I mention institutional system, I'm also referring to publishing system, funder system, profiling, etc. An integration requires always the user's authentication, and it can be done also with the public API when it comes to authentication and when it comes to read data. And if the organization is using the member API, then it is also possible to enable data synchronization with ORCID, which means basically that the organization can add data to the ORCID registry and also read data from the ORCID registry. And it is very important to remember that an integration is not looking up data in the ORCID registry, and it is not adding ORCID IDs manually or adding information from a bulk file. Integrations require always the authentication of the user, because the authentication part is central in a user control process. So whenever we have established authentication between two systems, then what is going to happen is that users log into their ORCID account to ensure basically that that application connects to the correct ORCID ID. This is why we also refer to authentication as securely sharing your ID, because here you are going to connect the researcher correctly with the corresponding ORCID ID. Then we will have information about who is asking for that authentication process. Here, I've used the example of an Austrian institution that connects ORCID in their CRIS system. And then we have some information about which permissions are given or asked. So the researcher knows in every single moment what type of information is asked or is going to be modified, collected, etc. Here, for example, we have an integration that is asking to add or update research activities. That can be works, affiliations, peer review, etc. Also, non-sensitive personal information such as country or keywords or other identifiers of that researcher. The integration is also asking to read trust data and also to get the ORCID. So when we are thinking of integrating with ORCID, we have basically three ways of doing it. The first way is using one of the existing certified service providers. We are working with several providers in order to guarantee that they have an integration with ORCID that fulfills ORCID's best practices. Some examples here might be DSpace CRIS or Symplectic Elements or Open Journal Systems. Then institutions have also the possibility to develop a custom integration, particularly if the system that they have internally at the institution is self-developed and is not based on an existing service provider. And then the third option, which is available for consortium members, is adopting the affiliation manager, which is a tool that allows consortium members to, using a CSV file, update affiliation, education, and professional activities data for researchers. I'm covering now the very first option, which is use a certified service provider. This past year, 2023, sorry for the lapses, we basically relaunched the certification program containing best practices. And for that, we focus on 4 potential workflows that normally our organizations use. Those are the manuscript submission systems or journal systems, research information systems like CRIS, repository systems, and also grant facility and application management system. Currently, this is the list of our certified service providers, and we are working on certifying many more as well. If you own or would like to have another certified system, or you want to learn more about this, please reach out to us, because we're more than happy to cover those certifications. And the second option is, as mentioned, developing an integration that is customized. This can take a bit more time and effort, but we are here to help with the process. And the main difference between a custom integration and a service provider is that point 1 till 4, we do this directly with the service provider instead of the institution, and then an institution using a service provider can jump directly to the integration with member API credentials, while a custom integration, we go with the institution through the different steps of talking about integration plans, testing in the sandbox server, inform about integration best practices and minimum requirements, and then also demo the integration. In general lines, when we've been talking to member organizations that have developed a custom integration, they refer to 45 to 60 hours of technical work, including testing from the time they begin preparing the integration until they launch it. And finally, the affiliation manager, which as mentioned is a tool that doesn't require any previous IT knowledge or any programming skills, because you're going to work with a CSV file and then a tool that is hosted by ORCID in the system. After uploading the CSV file, then you have the possibility to send emails asking for permissions directly from the system. Researchers will need to grant those permissions the same way we've seen with the authentication phase, and then the corresponding affiliation, education, or professional activity entry will flow to the ORCID records, and the institution will have the authenticated ID also for that. So now let's focus a bit more on the part about integrating ORCID in repositories, particularly referring to those best practices that I was talking about earlier, which were developed in the context of service providers, but actually are applicable for repositories in general. So, of course, we work with these best practices when we talk to service providers for repositories, let's say DSpace, ePrints, etc. But also, if you are developing an integration in your own repository, those are guidelines to bear in mind as well. Basically, it is a must that there is a workflow authenticating the authors and contributors' ORCID IDs, so the researcher that is going to interact in the repository. Then it is very important to collect those permissions, as mentioned. Ideally, the system will collect also authenticated IDs for contributors, not only for the main author or the first author, and then the ORCID ID should be displayed in the hosted research output, regardless whether that's a publication or a data set, software entry, etc. And whenever the metadata is sent from the repository to another platform, for example, from the institutional repository to OpenAIRE, it is important that the metadata, that the authenticated information is passed together with the metadata. And then, of course, write information to the ORCID record whenever possible. Ideally, also, best practices for repositories are that data from ORCID is used to populate the repository, if that's applicable, and also that admins can associate ORCID IDs with authors and contributors after the authentication process. One example at an institutional level is the DSpace integration that the Federal University of Uberlândia in Brazil has. In this case, as you can see here, a researcher can connect their ORCID ID in the login options. So it's the fourth option there. And then they are allowed to send permissions to the repository, and the repository will write data to the corresponding ORCID ID. In the particular case of the Federal University of Uberlândia, this data writing is used in order to work with theses and dissertations mainly, also other type of outputs, but this is one specific case. And as you can see in the image down below, the source is the Federal University of Uberlândia, in particular the institutional repository. This adds what we call a trust marker, and it is part of the trust built over time that I was referring at the beginning, basically because whenever we are reading this information, we are going to see that it is the Federal University of Uberlândia adding that information. Therefore, we can guarantee that the person actually wrote that thesis in that institution, and it is not information that is completely vague or even fake. Let's move now to the situation with CRIS systems. Following the same pattern, we've developed, focusing on service providers, a set of best practices to integrate ORCID in a research information system, but If you have your own research information system that is completely self-developed, you can also use these as a guideline for best practices. Again, here we need to have a process to authenticate researchers and collect authenticated ORCID IDs and the corresponding permissions. The permissions are super important because they are going to help, and they are going basically to determine whether we are able as an organization to interact with that ORCID record or not. Then the IDs should be displayed. Ideally, data from ORCID is going to be used to populate the researcher profiles and discover new researcher activities. So reading data from funding entries or from works, so that you have all that information in the corresponding research information system, and then add employment or education information to the researchers' ORCID records, and if applicable, works and funding awards as well. And then ideally here in the in CRIS systems or research information systems, there should be a link to the researcher profile in the research information system to connect to the ORCID record. And then, if possible, and if there is this connection internally, if you have a visiting researcher, that they are allowed to cover this workflow as well. And as in the case of repositories, administrators, after authentication, they can also associate IDs with other authors and contributors. Here, to pick an example of the institutional level, I'm going to use DSpace CRIS in this case, at the University of Bamberg in Germany. So you see the DSpace CRIS interface on the left part, and the ORCID ID correctly linked and displayed there after the authentication of the author. And on the right part, you see the entries added. First of all, an employment with the source, University of Bamberg, and then also a conference paper, so a piece of work or an output added to the system. Also, the source here is the university. So the data that is asserted is employment, education, and items in the works sections. And in both cases, this trust marker is added. A similar process happened, for example, with the CRIS system Pure. If you're using Pure from Elsevier, you will also have the connection between Scopus ID, if that's available in the Pure instance, added to the ORCID record. CRIS systems are not exclusively at an institutional level. We can also have them at a national level. And here I'm showing the example of the Finnish national CRIS research.fi or FI. Basically, they also use ORCID to facilitate metadata reusability. So as part of the researcher's profile tool, the researcher is able to connect securely with authentication the ORCID ID, and then the data flow that way as well. And they are currently working in order to export data from the research fee to the ORCID record as well. And our work related to repositories and CRIS system doesn't stop here, and that's the good part. So we keep working to support trustworthy connections between ORCID and then institutional and national CRIS systems and repositories. So we basically have a continuous work with CRIS and repository service providers, regardless whether the repository is more like a publication repository or it's a data repository. We keep working in that direction. If we talk to open source providers that have global coverage, Then we also promote the Global Participation Fund. So I also welcome you to check the Global Participation Fund, because we have funds for community building, but also for technical development focused on open source solutions and tools. So this can be of interest for many of you. Then we also have worked with national CRIS instances worldwide. For example, the Peruvian CRIS or the Ukrainian CRIS URIS, or the Norwegian CRIS GVA. And also, if you don't use an existing provider like DSpace CRIS, OGS, ePrints, etc., but you're developing your own solution, or you are integrating ORCID in your own solution, we also keep supporting organizations in that process. And with that, I would like to thank you all very much. I've seen several questions in the Q&A and chat, so we have, as promised, several minutes to cover those, actually half an hour, which is great. So thank you very much for the interest.
Thank you so much, Paloma. That was excellent. Let's maybe start with Q&A, then we'll address a question in a chat. So the first one is from Sergio. The affiliation certifying option for affiliated institutions can relate with ROR. Is a ROR integration?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Sergio, for the question. Actually, ROR, Research Organization Registry, for those of you that aren't familiar with ROR, is the identifier that we use in order to assert affiliations. So if an organization has an integration with ORCID and they would like to write affiliation data, regardless if they are using the affiliation manager or if they are using their own integration, then the identifier to use is ROR. Also, if you don't have a ROR ID for your organization, you can register it. Is completely free of charge. And if a researcher goes to the ORCID record and wants to add their own affiliation manually, also the information data is based on ROR. So what we do at the moment is every 3 weeks, we read the data from ROR. So if a new ROR ID is created, we include that into the data that we display. Same with updates in ROR. Imagine that we have an institution and the name is in Spanish, but in ROR is in English. So it's displaying, let's say, instead of Universidad de Buenos Aires, Buenos Aires University, then researchers aren't able to find that correctly. Then it is updated in ROR, and then we update that in our system as well.
Thanks a lot. And Iran Su is asking, is DSpace 7 going to be one of your service providers for the member API? If yes, when would it be working?
DSpace 7 in the version 7.3 and onwards is already, or better say, it was certified in the previous version of the certification. So currently the same workflow as I was describing applies. There are some details to be improved, and if I'm not mistaken, they are going to be improved during this year so that DSpace 7 works completely under the new certification program. But yes, so if the institution is using DSpace 7, they can completely move forward. And there is plenty of documentation about DSpace 7, so the integration with ORCID and DSpace 7.
Thanks a lot. Then Maureen is asking, do you have specific certification providers? We applied for certification to their CTS. So if we are interested in the integration of ORCID ID, is a CTS certification okay?
Maureen, I'm not sure about this CTS certification. So if you can write me an email about the case specifically, my email address is the Core Trust Seal. Okay, sorry. So the Core Trust Seal is separated from the ORCID certification, and as part of the Core Trust Seal, there is no reference to ORCID. The Core Trust Seal is basically for trustworthiness in repositories in general lines, and the ORCID certification might or might not be included as part of that repository. So if you want to have an integration in ORCID and your repository, that's a separated workflow. So it's not related. You can have an integration with ORCID and not being a Core Trust Seal certified, or the other way around as well. Or you can be both.
Excellent. Then Isabel is asking, if we're not an ORCID member institution, could our DSpace CRIS repository read information from researcher ORCID records?
The answer is yes. So DSpace CRIS, as well as DSpace, works with both the member API and the public API. So the only thing you will need to do is generate the credentials for the public API, and then researchers are going to be able to share the ID with authentication, and then you will be able to read public information as well. So the answer is yes. The thing that you won't be able to do is write data to the ORCID records, but you will be able to read information.
There is also a follow-up question from Marine. Maybe we should address that, why we haven't switched to another topic yet. My question is, what do you consider certified repository?
So here, what we are certifying is not the repository. What we are certifying is the integration. So how that repository is working with ORCID and the API. So the criteria are the ones that I was mentioning. So then, as mentioned, the repository platform can be trustworthy and a certified repository platform, but might not have an ORCID integration. So what we are certifying with ORCID is the integration. So that interaction via the API, not the repository per se.
Thanks a lot. And the next question is it possible to make the connection between the ORCID content and the CRIS persistent and autosync? The author gives one the permission, and then the systems can communicate new content both ways anytime. Like it seems to be available between ORCID and DataCite, Crossref currently, or will it only be one-time sync between systems launched at the time of the author action?
The answer here is it depends. So this basically depends on how that connection is established. What we have seen with several integrations with ORCID is that either the system, the CRIS system, or the repository, when there is new information, they send this new information to the ORCID record, following more or less, as you are mentioning in the question, the same pattern as DataCite or Crossref when they auto-update. Or what we've also seen is that the platform, either the CRIS system or the repository, establishes a period of time for a batch upload. So every month or every 2 weeks or every 2 months, depending on how it is configured, new information is added to the ORCID registry if available. Ideally, it would be on a synchronization basis. So whenever the system has new information, it is added to the ORCID record. But yes, so the answer is it is possible, but depends on the configuration of the platform.
Excellent.
I see a follow-up question on that question. So the other way around, bringing new ORCID content into the CRIS, same procedure. So there are some systems that read the ORCID record with a regular activity. Let's say every month or every 2 weeks, they read the API just to check whether there is new information or not. And others, what they do is establish a webhook notification. So basically, whenever there is new information on the ORCID record, the system receives a notification indicating that there is new information available, and then the system sends that call to ORCID to read that information.
Thanks a lot. And the next one may be too technical for this meeting, but in symplectic, ORCID carries the nodes field over to the BibTeX citation in the ORCID record. Is there any way we can alter the BibTeX citation elements to exclude the nodes? Or do we just need to go through all the nodes and remove any information that we don't want displayed in ORCID?
I am not entirely sure about the answer for this question. So basically, symplectic elements as a service provider should offer the possibility to correct the information you're sending to an ORCID record. But that might be something, as it looks like in a specific case, that might be something we need to look at with more detail. So Mel, if you can send me an email with the situation, then we can explore it, because right at this moment I don't really visualize exactly the process you're referring to.
Thank you. And the next one is, we use ORCID IDs in our CRIS system and I would like to push our records to ORCID. Are there any guidelines or recommendations on which level researchers should give their consent in our system for the ORCID export? For example, should we ask per publication type or for each entry in our system, or does ORCID recommend pushing all entries to ORCID?
Let me briefly share back my screen, because I can answer this a bit better with the authentication page being displayed. So just a second. Okay, so when a system asks for permissions, what researchers are going to be presented is something like this. As mentioned, so the permissions are asked for every research activity, as you can see here in the first line. Add, update your research activities, and this includes works, all work types, all affiliations, all funding, all peer review, etc. So in the case you are mentioning, there is no specific guideline saying we prefer only this type of work type or this type of affiliation. This is up to the institution to decide. And of course, you're more than welcome to talk to us about exactly your plans and what do you want to do. In general lines, ORCID is a platform where all the metadata can be included. So we don't recommend that you only add a type of work or a type of affiliation. If you have information about publications, if you have information about data sets, software, artistic performance, etc., everything is welcome. It is true that some institutions create kind of an intermediate interface for the researcher on their own to select which information they would like to add to an ORCID record, because sometimes they might have, I don't know, maybe a conference abstract they don't want to have publicly available. So that's an option for the institution. But from our point of view, every single output information is more than welcome.
Thanks a lot. Next one is from Isabel. Is there a user group where I can ask questions about the use of public API in this space, CRIS?
Yes, what I can do is sharing the link to our API user group, or maybe Fran can add that in the chat for everyone to have it. We have a public user group for the API. It is there, it is added right now in the chat, and you're more than welcome to join that group and of course interact with the community about the integration and the use of the public API. We don't support the public API directly, but we use always that group. And then when it comes to the DSpace CRIS configuration per se, that should be the Lyrasis community that is the host of DSpace who works with that.
Thanks a lot. Then Gultekin is asking, is it possible to make full testing before institutional membership, data synchronization, etc., with our CRIS system?
Yes, it is not only possible, it is even something that I strongly recommend that you test as much as you can. Yes, so the sandbox testing server is available for everyone, regardless if you're a member or not. And you only, probably Fran can help me adding the link here in the chat as well. You only need to request sandbox credentials and begin testing. You don't have to be a member for that.
Thanks a lot. That's excellent. There's a question, is there a possibility of uploading a CV to my ORCID account for the metadata to be updated? I guess not. But
there is no way to update a CV, but what it is possible is if you have all your publications or outputs in a BibTeX file, you can upload the BibTeX file on the interface directly, and then all your publications are going to be completed, but not a general CV.
Thank you. And there is another question. Hi, Paloma. Many thanks for all the information you shared. May I ask you the following? In case we would like to set up a production member API to Pure, a short description of our client application is needed. The related ORCID FAQ page says, this text will be displayed on the authorization screen with question mark icon to your integration users. A short description of your integration is required. For us, it's not clear who will see the short description. The ORCID user who would like to synchronize their data, or we as librarians.
Let me use a screen sharing again to answer this question, as it is probably easier for everyone and a bit more visual. So if I'm not mistaken, and if I understood the question correctly, I'm just sharing right now my screen. This is the sandbox API credentials form, but it will be the same for the member. So the only thing is the sandbox doesn't appear here. So this question, if I'm not mistaken, refers to this short description of your client application. Am I correct? Yes, so in this case, this is only a description of the application, in this case, a CRIS system based in Pure that we use for internal purposes to understand a bit more what this integration is about. But it's not related to something that is going to be used for researchers authenticating in your system or for any other purpose. It is basically only to understand the type of request we are receiving.
Thanks a lot. And we also have some questions in the chat. When you started your presentation, you were explaining a difference between lookup and synchronization. And Guido was asking, I don't understand the difference between the lookup and synchronization. Synchronizing requires lookup.
Thank you for that question. So when I refer to an integration, it is always including this authentication part. And then I'm referring to synchronize information for that ORCID record in particular. So you get the authentication, you get the permissions, and then you are allowed to read information from that ORCID record and also write information to that particular ORCID record. What I'm referring to when I speak about lookup is the possibility to simply search on the ORCID registry or pick the public data file and update or upload in a bulk all that data to your system, or enter the name of the researcher without authentication and read all that information into your system. That's the part about lookup that I'm referring to, without the authentication process. Thanks a lot.
Then Jan Erik wrote that Norwegian institutions could get in touch with him if they have questions about national integration. And then
thank you for correcting the name. So I said it wrong. I said GVA and it is NVA, the National Norwegian CRIS system.
And Paul is asking for sharing a contact because I would like to ask for a training for the consortium members.
Yeah, so my email address is there, but it is also added to the first slide of the presentation. So given that we are sharing the slides, you can definitely write me a message.
And there is a question in a Q&A. Florian is asking, can integrated CRIS request appearance on the search and link list in the ORCID profile work section?
Yeah. So here, these are two separated things. One is a search and link, and another thing is an institutional integration. So the search and link is not open to every single institution or every single repository integration. It is open to certain type of platforms. So for example, platforms that have a national or an international coverage, let's say at the moment, Crossref or Scopus or the German National Library, etc. So the search and link wizard is not a section opened for every single CRIS system. In any case, we are finishing some guidelines for search and link wizards as well, following the pattern that I've mentioned for repositories and CRISes. So there might be the case that the particular integration you're referring to actually qualifies for a for a search and link wizard, but this is not something for every single integration with ORCID.
Thanks a lot. And Guido is also saying, maybe it's not the scope of the session, but in case you know how many pharma companies have ORCID integrated when dealing with external and internal scientists. And I don't know, maybe other colleagues in the room know.
I don't have all the data. I know that Open Pharma has worked very closely with ORCID, using ORCID for researchers related to their field. But there are a couple of colleagues of mine working more with the pharma industry. So I hope that we can provide more details about that soon. For the time being is Open Pharma, and they have been super supportive of ORCID as well.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions. So if you still have questions, colleagues, you have maybe a couple minutes more to add them. See, Gultekin is asking, could you share with us what kind of benefits an institution or researcher may have from ORCID institutional membership, university management saying that ORCID membership is free for researchers. Why do we need to become a member?
That's a very good question, actually. So it is true for researchers, the ORCID ID is for free. However, if you want, as an institution, to interact with the ORCID record, then and write data to the ORCID record, then an institutional membership is required. Basically, the main point is to be able to add those trustworthy data to ORCID records and the validated information. With that, also the visibility of the institution is increased as the source of that information is going to be the institution. Then we also have several types of reports for member organizations in order to be able to monitor better the information that is added to the ORCID record, the researchers that are connected to that institution, etc. But also if you would, or if you want to communicate more with your with your management at an institution, we have also a page specific for universities and research institutions that I'm adding here in the chat, where you're going to see other benefits as well, detailed, and maybe this helps with conversations with your management.
Thank you so much, and there are also many thank you messages in the chat. And yes, you will receive a link to slides after this session. Thank you so much, Paloma. It was written in the chat that you are a great speaker, and indeed, you explained everything very, very clear.
So thank you all for listening. Of course, the slides are going to be shared. I will share with Irina the last version, and she will be able to share that together with the recording. And of course, I'm available for questions if you need them. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you so much, and thanks a lot, Christian, Martin, Fran, for helping to organize this session. It was excellent. Then wishing everyone a good day, evening, morning, whenever you are, and expect an email from me with a link to slides and recording in case you want to share the recording with your colleagues. And thanks again for joining and spending this hour with us. It's very, very useful. Thank you so much, Paloma.
Stay well, everyone. Have a very nice rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.